Thanks for joining us today. I'm Gabe Garish, owner of Backwoods Pursuit, and today we're going to do an Orion cooler review. This is the Orion Core 65 cooler. It's a hard-sided cooler, and it was a part of our huge 16 cooler review where we did some extensive thermal retention testing on all 16 coolers. We put them all in the same situation and did a bunch of testing and tracked all that data. That information is going to be in the description here. I'll put a link to that huge review. And we put a video together as well, putting together some of those results. Definitely go check those out. But in this video, we're going to look specifically at the Orion Core 65, some of the features that you get with Orion coolers, and some of the things we liked and didn't like about it. Always appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I'll put links to those down in the description, as well as a link to our website, backwoodspursuit.com, and a link to the Orion Core 65 cooler if you want to check it out for yourself. Let's get started. All right, to get started, let's take a look at one of the things that we tested for in our big review with each and every cooler. So we measured the actual internal volume of each and every cooler. This is the Core 65, and we measured it by filling it with water and then draining all the water and measuring how much water would fit inside the cooler. This one measured out to be 67.9 quarts rather than the 65 that is the advertised size. So larger than advertised, which is really nice that Orion gives you a larger than advertised internal volume. That's not always the case, so it's nice that the Core 65 here measures out to be almost 3 quarts larger than that advertised size. Really like that about the Orion Core 65 here. Now we weighed each and every cooler as well, and the Core 65 weighed out to be 36 pounds. Not the lightest, but certainly not the heaviest either, right about the middle of the road as far as weight. And of course, that extra weight is what you would expect in a hard-sided cooler like this, where you have some robust insulation to keep your food and drink cold for a long time. So right about the middle of the pack as far as weight goes. Now we also took that internal volume measurement and calculated the actual cost per quart based on that true internal volume. And the Core 65 here came out at a price of $4.94 per quart. Again, not the most expensive by any stretch, but certainly not the least expensive either. Kind of, again, middle of the road there, but a good value for what you get here in the Orion Core 65. Now, a couple of the physical features here before we get into the thermal retention performance results. Some of the nice things about this Orion Core 65, their latch system is really nice here. You've got an aluminum latch here on the end with the rubberized section here that gives you leverage there and allows you to get a nice positive lock here on the lid, and there's 2 of them on. This is the 65 here. And so we really like that latch system. It's really easy to operate. It doesn't bind up on you. Those latches can get in the way of the lid at times. If you open them both here and then open the lid here, that can get in the way like that. But that's not uncommon with these coolers, but it is something where you may want to grab that and then use the leverage there to close that. So pretty common in hard-sided coolers like this and these roto-molded coolers, but just one of those things that you have to be aware of when you're opening and closing the lid. You do have some can openers here, which is nice as well. It's just a really well-built cooler, really solid, not overly bulky. It certainly is larger than some of the ultralights, but not overly bulky. Now the Core 65 comes with 1 drain plug and it's not tethered. I do wish and I do like having 2 drain plugs and having them tethered, but you just get the 1 drain plug. It is a little bit on the smaller side versus some of the others, so it'll take a little bit longer to drain if you are draining the cooler. Again, not a big deal or a deal breaker by any stretch, but it is nice when there's 2, depending on what you want to do. Just one of the features you get, and of course you get the handles here, and then there's also a handle. You can grab it and carry it. Like most coolers, you hear a latch on the bottom you can grab onto, or the rope handle. Now, I will say that this rope handle here, the rubberized portion here, is more robust than some of the others that we tested. It is very, very nice, and it's very comfortable as well. And of course, that is on both sides. USA made, awesome that Orion is USA made, love that. And it's one of those things that certainly not all the coolers that we tested are that way. Now you also get a 10-year warranty, so Not quite a lifetime like some of them, but certainly not the lowest. Some of the coolers we tested had as little as a 1-year warranty, so definitely a good warranty with the Orion. Now the Core 65 is also certified grizzly bear resistant by the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee, which is great if you're camping in a campsite that requires certified bear resistant containers. This is going to do that for you. And like I mentioned earlier, you have those can openers, but it's unique in that you have one on each and every corner of this cooler of the Core 65. So each one of these stainless steel corners here has that bottle opener. So it is nice to, no matter what side of the cooler you're on, you can go ahead and open a beverage if you need to do so. All right, now for the all-important thermal retention testing. This Core 65 was a part of that big 16 cooler review, and the way we set this up to make it as equal as possible for all the coolers in the review is we put them all inside a Kodiak canvas tent with a nice white top to it, light diffusing, and it made it so that no one cooler or no one side of the tent got more direct sunlight than the other. The temperatures inside the tent stayed really consistent across the board and inside the entire tent. They also got up to about 100 degrees on a couple of occasions, so really gave us a good temperature range to test these. We tracked the temperatures inside the tent and then opened each and every cooler 4 times a day and tracked the internal air temperature of every single cooler, looking for how long the coolers kept the internal air temperature above or below that 40-degree mark, because that is the safe storage temperature for meat. We really wanted to key in on that because it doesn't really matter how cold the water is. If the water is in the temperature, if you have something stored, say in the dry goods basket, something of that nature, we really wanted to look at the internal air temperature of the coolers to identify what's going to be the best in that regard. So we tracked all of that data, put it together in charts and spreadsheets and whatnot. All of that information is over on the website, backwoodspursuit.com. Again, I'll put a link to that down in the description. It's definitely worth checking out to see how everything ranked and all those data points, way more than we can go over in this video here today. Now we also pre-chilled each cooler overnight. We filled them with ice and water bottles to make sure that they were nice and chilled before we started the testing the next day. And we filled every cooler, once we started the testing, we filled every cooler with a 2-to-1 ice to water bottle ratio, filling every cooler to about 80% of the internal volume of that cooler based on what we measured. So everything was equal as far as the percentage of the fill volume for each cooler based on their actual internal volume, to try to make this as absolutely equal as possible across the board. So getting into the performance of the Orion Core 65 in that test, we put the data together in a size category as well as a 1 through 16 ranking. So if one or the other matters more to you, obviously comparing this size to a similar size category is going to be the most relevant. We found that the larger coolers tended to do better than the smaller coolers and of course ultralight coolers. But in the 65 quart class, the Core 65 here lasted 5¼ days, keeping that internal air temperature below 40 degrees, so the safe storage temperature for meat. Meaning you've got 5¼ days if you do that 2-to-1 ice to water or ice to contents ratio of keeping that internal air temperature below 40 degrees. So it did really well. But what was interesting about this is that it lasted an additional 2 days having ice in the cooler, but being between that 40 and 50 degree mark. So that wasn't the case across the board. About half the coolers that we tested did that. The other half stayed below 40 degrees until all the ice was melted. So that was one of the interesting things about the Core 65. As far as ice retention, as far as how long it kept ice in the cooler, it was one of the best in its class. But as far as keeping the internal air temperature below 40 degrees, it was right about middle of the pack as far as the 65 quart class. So that was one of the interesting data points we pulled away in doing the test the way that we did it. And how that played out was that it came in 4th in its class overall of the 65 quart class of keeping the internal air temperature below 40 degrees. And the other thing that we tracked is the average internal air temperature during that time period that it kept below 40 degrees. So during that 5¼ days that it held below 40 degrees, the average internal air temperature was 37.6 degrees. Again, not the best in class by any stretch, but also not the worst either. So it was kind of, again, middle of the road as far as that internal air temperature. Now for some of the pros and cons of the Core 65 here. Really like the way that it's built. It's somewhat slim and compact for a 65 quart internal volume, and it is larger than advertised, which I really like that as well. Really good build quality. Really like this latch system. It's really easy to operate and very solid. You know that you have a good latch here. Some of the others didn't quite provide such a positive latch there, a positive locking mechanism. So I really like that. Like that you have the 4 can openers on each of the corners. Really well built in that regard, and really do like the handle system here. It's one of the better handles, the rope handle portion that of all the ones that we tested, so I really do like that as well. Some of the things that didn't love as much was the thermal retention was kind of right in the middle. Not that it was bad by any stretch, but if we're looking primarily at the 40-degree temperature benchmark, it was, again, 4th in that regard. So not as good as I was hoping as far as that goes, but it did really, really well in ice retention as far as keeping the ice in the cooler. Again, 7¼ days keeping ice in the cooler. And again, that's opening it 4 times a day and checking it, so not just closing it up and leaving it. So it did very well in that regard. Love that it's USA made, and love that it's grizzly bear resistant as well. Both very, very good things. So that is the Core 65. It's a great cooler. It's a great value. It's definitely not the most expensive, not the least expensive either, but it's a great cooler. I'll put a link to this down in the description so you can check it out for yourself. Drop any questions or comments. Love to help you if we can. Thanks for watching here today, and we will see you next time.